To me, one of my absolute favourite genre of gamings would be platforming collectathons. I mean, Banjo-Kazooie is my favourite game of all time, and around the PS2 era we saw an incomprehensible burst of mascots just explode onto the screen, with Ratchet and Clank, Sly Cooper, Crash, Spyro, Ty, everybody that you could possibly imagine. But today we're going to be talking about one of my absolute favourite series in this genre. Of course, I'm talking about Jak and Daxter. I remember picking up the first game when I was a kid and I absolutely played it to death, and the series became one of my favourites for the PS2. However, I realised I haven't played a Jak and Daxter in probably close to 10 years. So I decided that today this would be the perfect chance to go through every single Jak and Daxter game that has ever been created and give my take on the entire series. So yeah, that's what we're going to be doing today. For those of you that are familiar with the series, you know that this can go to some pretty wild places from entry to entry. So let's waste no time. Let's get straight into it as I play, review and break down every single Jak and Daxter game ever existed. Let's begin. We of course must start with the original Jak and Daxter released in 2001 for the PS2. I absolutely loved this game growing up. For a considerable portion of my PS2 enjoying days, my time was spent on Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank 2 and Ty the Tasmanian Tiger. So let's break this entire game down and see what Jak and Daxter really has going for it. To begin with, of course, the story. As you'd expect, Jak and Daxter are our two main characters, and we join them both for the first time as they are misbehaving. Both of them take a trip to Misty Island, an incredibly dangerous location that they have been warned to stay away from. After looking around, they first witness a bunch of creatures being commanded by two obviously bad guys, before things take an even darker turn. Soon after, they discover a gigantic tanker of dark eco, with eco itself being like the life energy of everything. And through a series of unfortunate events, Daxter decides to take a quick dunk in the goo, and through that he gets transformed into a grotesque and disgusting monster. Okay, I may have over-exaggerated that, but you get the idea. Unfortunately, our village elder Seaman the Sage informs us that there's only one person who has studied Dark Eco enough to potentially even help Daxter and get him back to his human form. So our adventure begins and we must find him and hope that he can indeed help. Essentially, that is the story to begin with, and from that, we're literally thrown into Tutorial Island. Here, we learn all of the basics at play and how the game functions. So of course, as I previously mentioned, the first title is a platforming collectathon through and through. The first and the item you'll collect most throughout these games are eggs called Precursor orbs. They are an ancient artifact, but in this game they act as currency and are fairly common. You'll find 100 per level, and these can be traded with people you meet around the world for our next and rarer collectible type, power cells. These are the most important collectibles, and there are 10 to every level. We need to collect power cells in order to repair vehicles that will unlock more of the game. For example, by collecting a bunch after the first few locations, we will then use them to power a hover bike that will allow us to cross a dangerous lava section into the next collection of levels. The final collectible type are the scout flies. These are pretty simple in premise. There are 7 on every level inside these breakable crates. Collect them all and you'll be rewarded with another power cell. Simple. With the collectible type summed up, let's talk about the movement and the combat of Jak and Daxter. And folks, you may not believe me when I say this, but both of these aspects are absolutely incredible for this title. They have adapted a genius system here in which every single move can pretty much be branched together with zero animation interruptions, meaning you can uppercut, spin in the air and crash back onto the floor in a single smooth motion, and this feels absolutely fantastic to control. The fluidity is amazing, and without question it is the highlight of the first title. That would set a standard of movement and combat forward in the series, even though on the surface it does appear quite simple, with a wide array of moves as well, from rolling, ducking, jumping, double jumping, all of the things that you expect from a platformer. You will be making your way around the levels fairly easy, and again, everything just works perfectly. Now, earlier we mentioned Dark Eco, as that's the goo that turned Daxter into a mutant, but that's not the other type we'll find, as yellow, blue, green, and red Eco can all be found throughout the levels as well, and each help Jak in a particular way. Green Eco is life and collecting it gives you health. Blue Eco is the next most common that you'll find, and it powers Jak up to be able to sprint faster, and you'll also be able to unlock special doors and vents with his power as well, so it's needed a lot to reach certain parts of the levels. Yellow Eco turns Jak's primary punch into a fire attack that launches a projectile, and can be yet another great way of taking care of enemies. And finally, Red Eco turns Jak into the Hull, and with this his strength becomes unmatched, being able to strike down terrifying foes sometimes in a single punch. So that's pretty much everything you'll find commonly within the basic gameplay loop of the title. But that's not where the mechanics end, as Jak and Daxter also puts a lot of emphasis on minigames as well to keep the levels fresh and unique. Now, I don't remember there being so many different things to do in this game, but each level will truly give you a unique experience, often for the reward of a power cell. And not only that though, these minigames can actually help unlock more of the levels later on. For example, within the jungle you can find a fisherman trying to catch some supper. We of course offer to help and begin the fish catching minigame, where you have to swipe up the right type of fish into the net. Collect enough whilst ignoring the poison fish and you'll not only be rewarded with a power cell, but the fisherman then gives you the option to use his boat freely to Misty Island, then unlocking that as a new level. And that's just a single example. Throughout the game you'll be herding yak cows, shooting rats in waves, herding mole rats, and even taking part in races. Each level truly has a unique aspect that you won't find anywhere else in the game. It helps keeps the game feeling fresh and not feel as repetitive, as sometimes that can be a real big problem with collectathons. If there isn't a good variety of things to do, they can fall stale extremely quickly. But thankfully, Jak and Daxter doesn't do that in the slightest. Okay, so with the fundamentals of the game handled, it's now time to talk about the aesthetics and the characters. So let's begin with the levels. And across the board, you actually have an incredible variety of locations, even though they all do take place within the same island. Jungles, underwater city, spider caves, ice mountains, and much more. Each location looks incredible and fits the theme it's going for. The levels themselves aren't small either, and each location has plenty to do and explore, without it also feeling inflated for the sake of it. There is real structure to these levels, and looking in every nook and cranny to find all of those secrets that they hide is just as fun now as it was back then. In all fairness, there was only a single level in the entire game that I wasn't a big fan of, which was the underwater Atlantis level. For me, it was a significant jump in difficulty, and some parts could get really frustrating here due to the intense platforming and constant danger, and death everywhere. But again, even though it's my least favourite of the bunch, I certainly didn't have a bad time here, and I doubt any level in this game could be classed as bad. They all have a very specific vision, and I personally think they knocked them out of the park. So let's move on to the characters, starting of course with Jak and Daxter. Now, Jak himself is fully mute, a silent protagonist, but that's not really a bad thing at all. He still has tons of charisma and character, just from his body language alone, and even without words you can tell that he's a little bit cocky, adventurous, and definitely naive. He's also got a fantastic design that really makes him stand out as one of the most recognisable PlayStation mascots of the early 2000s. Daxter, on the other hand, is the exact opposite of Jak. But to me, Daxter is what truly sells the game on the characters. He is fantastic. He's not curious in the slightest, but rather scared of everything and cowardly. But he puts on that brave persona at all times, thinking himself as the main hero, and the reason that the world will be saved. He is also the perfect comedy relief, as most of the jokes in this game either come from him or use him as the butt of the joke, and this is what truly makes Daxter so loved. He is genuinely hilarious.
Wait! I'll stay here and protect Kira. Jak, I think you're ready to handle that monster without me.
Oh, really heroic of you.
Don't worry about me, baby. You know what they say. Big things come in small packages.
And personally, nothing sells this more than the scenes that play when you get knocked out.
Step 1, stay alive. Step 2, think about not doing something like that again. Don't step into the light, Jak. Don't step into the light.
For me, genuinely, a lot of love for this game comes from Daxter. He reminds me of Ren and Stimpy with his overdramatic reactions and emotions, and I think that if Daxter wasn't as great as he is, the game wouldn't be regarded as well as it is. But there are, of course, more characters to talk about. The next two that are most important are the Green Sage Samos, who acts like your guide throughout the game. Again, he is a great character, grumpy as always and already fed up with Daxter, which makes the moments where these two interact brilliant as they play off each other perfectly. Kira is the next and is Samos' daughter, and the brains behind the mechanics and the tech in the game. She is the one who fixes up the bike so Jak can reach new locations, and she obviously is meant to serve as the love interest as well. So again, she's great. Now, there are also a smattering of characters that you'll meet throughout the game as well, and each one to me is wonderful. From meeting knights that are terrified of the bosses, swamp-living rednecks, and Tomb Raider wannabes, the characters you meet all really do help the world building, and I was always curious to see what insane characters we would be meeting next. Now, it seems obvious that the world building, levels, and characters were really looked into for a priority of the title, and that's obvious. So much love and attention has been put into the entire experience, and nothing sells that more than the fact that this game has 0 loading screens. None whatsoever. According to some interviews, immersion was one of the biggest factors whilst Naughty Dog was creating this title, and to really sell that, they made it so that you can walk from the very beginning of the game to the very end without a single loading screen. And I'll be honest, I didn't even notice this the first time I played it, but going back now, it's absolutely incredible. Every single location that you can see in the game you can visit. Now, of course, it's time to talk about the boss fights. Throughout the game, there are a couple of tougher enemies that you'll find, from giant carnivorous plants, lava-dwelling boulder throwers, and of course, the big boss of the game. They are absolutely fine, tense little moments where you're really tested on your movement and combat, and they serve the game fine. The boss fights aren't anything to scream home about, but they certainly aren't bad in the slightest. Personally, my favourite in the game is the plant boss, because after you defeat it, you can stand on it for more personal gain. Finally as well, folks, we need to discuss the soundtrack and audio, and again, they have really put a lot of effort into how this game sounds. The soundtrack to every level is pretty damn good, and fits the aesthetic of the design. For the example, the soundtrack in the spider caves are tense, mysterious, and a little haunted, whereas the music for the jungle is upbeat and jolly. But before we end this section on the first title, I do want to quickly discuss more of the story, now that the premise of the game has been set up. Now, as I said earlier, your job throughout the entire game is to find the Dark Eco Sage, and get him to turn Daxter back into a regular boring human. However, it comes to pass that the very sage that we're trying to find is the villain of the entire story, which I thought was a nice twist. Other than that, I must say that the villains of Galt and Maya for this game are quite underwhelming. Besides meeting them at the very beginning of the game, we don't see them until almost 3/4 of the way through, and at that point they appear to just drop some exposition on what their great evil master plan is. It turns out that they have captured all of the sage colas in the land, and are going to use them to power some form of old-fashioned precursor technology thing in order to cover the world in Dark Eco, which certainly is a problem. But that's the most we see of them until the final fight, and for me, I did want more. Other than them just saying what bad things they've done and want to do, I have no reason to really get invested in taking these both down, and I feel like they should have had more screen time and interactions with the main characters to really set them up as the big bad of the game. It's a small complaint, but it's one nonetheless. Easily one of the most forgettable final bosses in the entire series. As you'd expect, the game ends on an incredible final fight that does play really well in all fairness, and definitely feels like a spectacle. Once you've defeated Galt and Maya, the world is saved and jobs are good'n. On the whole, this is a fantastic title, and easily one of the greatest games of the platforming collectathon era. For its time, I cannot stress how much innovation this game brought to the table, and every moment is filled with so much attention to detail. I mean, you've all seen the animations that play when you collect a power cell. Iconic. But even though it may appear simple on the surface, this really was a game to me that was ahead of its time, and turned a page on what platformers should be. It's creative, fun, a joy to play and control, and just the perfect charming collectathon experience. So for Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy, obviously it's gonna go into the #1 spot, but it also is gonna take a pretty impressive game to dethrone this, because I'd class this as an absolute masterpiece. And in my opinion, it is easily one of the greatest games of the collectathon era. With that, you'd expect this game to explode, and whilst it certainly didn't perform badly, I do feel like it was a little bit pushed under the rug, and not through any faults of its own. But the release of the PlayStation 2 was one of the most defining moments of gaming history, and it was just buried under other ambitious titles and new releases. These ambitious titles, though, would absolutely give Naughty Dog some things to think about on where to take their series next, and 2 years later, the long-awaited sequel would finally be released. But if you were expecting more of what came before, you are going to be heavily disappointed, as the next title in this series is unfathomably different to what we just enjoyed. We of course now arrive at Jak II. Wow, Daxter doesn't even get to be featured in the title this time. Interesting choice. But anyway, now it is impossible to talk about this game without first discussing the ways in which this title came about. Now I'm sure you folks who are die-hard Jak and Daxter fans already know most of what I'm about to say, but it still needs to be quickly mentioned in my eyes. So as I said, when the PS2 launched, it changed gaming pretty much overnight, and no game is more responsible for that than GTA 3. When this game dropped, what it did to the industry cannot be summed up into words. It instantly set a brand new industry standard. So with an entire new wave of games hitting the store, a lot of old genres seem to die down pretty quickly, and one of those genres was collectathons. So for the next Jak adventure, Naughty Dog took a monumental risk and decided to change the genre of Jak and Daxter entirely, and this is easily one of the biggest genre switches within a game series that I think we have ever seen, at least for mainline entries. So in a way, Jak II was the developer's thought on how do we blend the amazing world of Jak and Daxter whilst having a game that feels as good to play as GTA 3. With that, Jak II released. Okay, with the history lesson over, let's crack this controversial game open and see exactly what we're dealing with. Firstly, of course, the story. Jak II takes place at the end of the last game's events. The evil villains have been smited, and in that process they have found a bizarre piece of Precursor technology. When the gang try to use it, they are then catapulted into a bizarre vortex and are spat out in a dystopian city obsessed with metal, where Jak is pretty much instantly kidnapped. 2 years later we rejoin Jak, and it's clear he hasn't been enjoying himself. In fact, the opposite. Since Jak has a special connection to Eco, he has been the test dummy for dark eco experiments, trying to create the ultimate dark eco weapon so that this city can defeat a nameless foe. Jak's luck turns, however, as soon Daxter is able to find and rescue his beloved friend. And besides, with the appearance of Jak, we are instantly greeted to one of the biggest changes that they decided to make.
I've been looking for you for 2 years! Say something! Just this once!
I'm gonna kill Praxis.
Yep, Jak is quite the vocal Sally now. Not only that, the experiment seemed to work perfectly, as we also get a glimpse of Dark Jak for the first time. Now, to cut a long story short, we escape, and then the rest of the game is Jak teaming up with a resistance gang in order to save the day once again, albeit in a completely different way that came before. So essentially, that's the premise, but of course, we'll dissect it a little bit more as we work our way through the title. It's now time to talk about the controls and the mechanic changes, and since there is quite a lot to discuss here, let's first talk about the controls, which actually behave pretty much identically to before. Movement and combat has effectively just been copied and pasted, with a few tweaks and quality of life improvements, and that's not a problem at all. It works. No need to interfere with something that works perfectly before. Once we escape the complex for the first time, that's where we're introduced into the new aspects of the game. Firstly, the map. This time for Jak, you are introduced into a gigantic hub world filled with slums, markets, and an arena, and much, much more. Each section is interconnected, and you can now travel on the city cars that fill the locations. So, other than the first few missions of the previous game and the interconnected Zoomer missions, now there is a gigantic emphasis on driving, and you will absolutely need to do it to explore the huge city that we now call home. Now, I'd like to discuss driving straight away and get it out of the way with. I will be completely honest, I absolutely am not a fan of driving in this title. Every single vehicle feels like you're trying to control a hovercraft, and whilst yes, it's clear that that's kind of what's happening, to actually control it feels awful. I played this game roughly for about 12 hours, and by the end of it I could get around fine, but you will bump into everything in your path. Walls, houses, other cars, people, everything is an obstacle, so since you can't actually control the cars that well, you will just constantly drift into things, and since cars have horrendous health on top of that, you'll also be blowing up quite a bit, which could be really irritating since a lot of missions also rely on driving to complete, which to me exposes the flaws quite badly. Since so much stank has been added on the new ways to move around the level, I can't help but feel disappointed. But that's only one part of an entirely new system, so let's move on to the next. The next insane addition to Jak II, of course, is that it is now a shooter as well, and it doesn't take long to unlock the first of many different types of weapons. Now, it's no lie that Jak II is incredibly controversial, and one of the biggest talking points on why is gunplay, as a lot of the criticisms that I've seen come around this game all revolve around the guns, and I don't think that's fair at all. For context, in this game you unlock 4 weapons, a shotgun, a rifle, a minigun, and a grenade launcher, and each work exactly as you'd imagine. Now, these guns are a touch clunky to use in my opinion. Since there is no reticle for aiming, the entire concept is focused on Jak auto-aiming onto targets that you can then take out. It takes some getting used to, but it does work fine. The problem that I found is that many people complain that the gun variations are pointless and boring, since the yellow blaster is easily the best weapon in the game, and most of the time time when people talk about shooting, they will mention that the best way to attack is jumping, spinning, and unloading all of your ammo at the same time, until you hit everything by accident, and this isn't correct in the slightest. To me, the gunplay and the melee combat have been perfectly combined, as you can use all of your weapons in the middle of the melee animations that we're used to from the previous game. Not only that, but each weapon clearly has its specific uses, and when properly used, they are fantastic. The shotgun is great for massive clumps of weak enemies and has decent pushback. The blaster is great for precision and damage, so choosing your targets carefully and getting rid of them from a distance is what I'd say this is best at. The minigun is fantastic at stronger enemies as it interrupts their attacks and shreds shields. And finally, the grenade launcher is great for blowing stuff up. I mean, of course it is, it's a grenade launcher. The shooting and combat feel absolutely fantastic when you blend them both together in your attacks, and use each for the reason that it was made for. Spinning in a circle with a blaster is a terrible thing to do, as it wastes all of your ammo and you'll barely hit anything. And as I'll mention later on, conserving ammo is very important in this game. So on the whole, I actually loved the shooting in this title, and for such an important aspect, they definitely nailed it in my eyes. With us previously mentioning Dark Jak as well, let's quickly talk about this. Now, good ecos are completely removed from the game, and the only eco available now is the Dark eco that you can collect off enemy corpses. When the bar is full, you can now unleash Dark Jak, who moves at incredible speeds, deals a ton of damage, and has some upgrades later that can wipe a battlefield in seconds. On the surface, this is a great addition, and whilst there is a lot going for it, on the whole, I'm not a fan actually. The main problem for me is that during this mode, you move so fast but still take damage. So unless you're popping a super move, you'll find yourself realizing that this is quite underpowered, as not only does it take a bizarre amount of time to fully charge, but when you do, most of the time you'll be taking little hits constantly, and more often than not for me, it would actually get me killed. So using it wasn't as fun as it appears on paper. For the amount of time it takes to grind and the insane visuals when it happens, it feels really weak and doesn't make Jak the terrifying force that he could have been in my eyes. So with that discussed, let's move on to the levels themselves. Again, a lot of changes have been made. Instead of finding a new world and exploring all that there is to find, you'll instead revisit the same few locations throughout your travels. But every time you return to a place you've once explored, this time you'll be able to unlock new paths that let you go that little bit deeper into it. For me personally, this is also a bit of a downgrade as well. Now, don't get me wrong, the visuals are absolutely fine, but I can't help but feel the charm of them has vanished, and they all really feel the same. Inside the cities, the sewers, the Precursor ruins all kind of blend together a little too well for me, and I wish there was a little bit more depth to each location. As intended for the game, it works fine and does its job well, but I can't help but miss the old ones that came before instead, so make of that what you will. So from levels, we of course must talk about the missions of the game, and again folks, I think that they are unfortunately another downgrade. Gone is pretty much all of the variety of the last game, and in Jak 2 most of the missions are go here, shoot things until you reach the end, do something at the end, rinse and repeat for the entire title. It got old very quickly. They do try to mix up the gameplay from time to time, but none of it lands well in my opinion, and honestly I can only remember about maybe 3 or 4 unique missions off the top of my head. Now another point of controversy is that many regard the difficulty of Jak 2 to be a considerable spike to what came before, and half of me agrees and half of me doesn't. Yes, the levels are a lot more unforgiving, and the main point to prove this for me are the lack of checkpoints, and the infuriating decision not to replenish Jak's ammo and charges on death. Say for example, I use most of my ammo and Dark Jak to get through a tough sequence. If I then die, I'll respawn at the start, have to do it all over again, only this time I won't have the ammo or the charges back that I used. This could be brutal, and is definitely a terrible feature in my eyes. As I said, Dark Jak takes so long to charge up that using him on a dud run is nothing short of agony. Other than that, I can't agree to much else. Don't get me wrong, there are a few sections where I wanted to rip out my head thoroughly, but most of the time, if you're just a touch slower, more cautious and shoot from a distance, you shouldn't have that much trouble. So even though it is definitely a jump in difficulty, I can't say it's unreasonably difficult. But again, I suppose this just depends on the player. Now, of course, it's time to talk about the characters again, and we'll start with Jak and Daxter. Daxter behaves and acts the exact same that came before, and once again, he is the star in my eyes. He's hilarious, his jokes and quips all pretty much land, and he's just brilliant. Jak, however, as you'd expect, is quite different. Jak in this game has a fantastic little edge to him. He is extremely fond of lashing out and causing as much chaos as he can to those that hate him. I also must say that the voice actor for Jak did a phenomenal job, and considering that the previous game had no voice whatsoever, it's actually quite impressive that I was able to connect to Jak on the same level that I did before, considering that he's essentially a brand new character. The side characters are also fantastic across the board. Samos and Kira work as well as they did in the last game. However, I will say that it was bizarre that the game amps up the reveal of Kira as the mechanic of the stadium, like it wasn't obvious from the millisecond when we first heard her. But the new additions this time are Torn, Ashlyn, Sig, Pekka, and the incredible Crew, who is easily the best addition to the game in my eyes. Not only is his design absolutely fantastic, but he has some brilliant back and forth with Daxter, which makes every cutscene including these two something enjoyable to watch. But it's worth saying that all of the new character additions are really fantastic and feel totally believable in this bizarre new world. With music and the soundtrack, for the most part as well, they knocked it out of the park again. Things sound just as good as what came before. However, again for me, there is also just one noticeable problem that I couldn't shift, and that's the music that plays when you're casually traveling from mission to mission. When you're exploring the city, the music that plays, I am not a fan of in the slightest. The entirety of the exploring section is just this one song, so it gets really old really quickly, and by the end of the title, I was just wishing for a way to mute it, as it was actively making my playthrough more unenjoyable. But as I said, for the most part, the music and soundtrack are fantastic throughout the board. I really told you folks that there would be a lot to discuss here, and I wasn't joking, and we're not done yet. So next we need to discuss the boss fights, and I'm really sorry to say that I absolutely hated all of these. In the previous games, they were almost a clever puzzle where you had to play smart, and here they are just painful and pointless shooter loops. Besides the design of the bosses, which are all great, their loops are pretty much avoid their constant attacks, they will give you a brief moment to attack yourself, rinse and repeat until death, and that for me was such a letdown. Not only that, but most of them as well were really difficult to me. So I guess that's another point in it being harder than what came before, but you can hardly take any hits, and you must behave perfectly to win, and even when you do, it doesn't feel like a great victory. The first fight with the Baron on the rooftops nearly broke me. I think I spent at least 2 hours on this boss fight. I despise this boss so much, which is such a shame because I love Clancy Brown and the character that he plays here. So unfortunately, again, not another good note for me. Now the story, I must say as well, is quite good. I really did enjoy the new setting and characters, and there are definitely a couple of decent twists that I did not remember and absolutely did not see coming. One I did, but the rest got me. It's a lot more involved and convoluted than last time, with the War of the Metalheads trying to take revenge on the Baron and his soldiers whilst also trying to save the city. It's honestly quite good, so no complaints there. Now, on the whole, I feel like Jak II is definitely a Marmite situation. You either love it and think it's the best, or you think it's arse and hate it. I can't lie folks, I do think this game has some phenomenal points of success, but for the most part, I didn't enjoy myself too much with this title. The most annoying and boring part of the entire game to me is the sheer distance you have to travel in this gigantic map just to access the missions. And I kid you not folks, I would say roughly that at least a third of this game, if not more, is just slowly driving to find your next task, and it was unbearable. Not only, as I said, is the driving terrible in my eyes, but the city is completely bland and lifeless. Now, I don't want to ask too much of a title that came out in 2003, but other than a few races and a few Easter egg hunts, there is nothing to do in this city. There's nobody to talk to, nothing to explore, it's just there. And I got bored of this setting maybe 2 hours in at maximum. I feel like this game needed longer in the oven, just to smooth out some of the areas that needed some polish. A touch more love on the world building in the city, a bit more love to the controls of driving, and definitely more love on the variety of the missions, and I genuinely don't think I'd have a single thing to complain about. But unfortunately, I will say that out of all of the Jak and Daxter games in the series, this is one of the titles that I definitely will not be returning to anytime soon. If you are a fan of this game though, I totally understand it, and I mean no harm to your precious game, but for me, it just misses the mark on the potential that it could have had. Again, I'm going to give it phenomenal credit for the leap to this genre. The shooting is fantastic, the characters are great, and the story is definitely better, but that's about it. But unfortunately, that means that Jak II is going to be going below the first, and if I was you, I'd also expect it to fall a couple more spots as well. Sorry. However, contrary to my opinions, the reviews were once again quite good for the title. People were already awaiting where the series would go next. Would it perfect what it's just given us? Or again, will the genre be thrown around a bit and now Jak and Daxter will be a survival horror? Well, only a single year later, Jak III released, and we had our answer. Jak III released in November of 2004, and it would seem that the devs have stuck to their guns on Jak being an adventure shooter. But what else has changed in this ambitious third installment? Well, let's waste no time and see what's different. To begin with again, the story. Jak III takes place at the end of the last game's events, and we rejoin our heroes as they're being kicked out and exiled from Haven City. Now, even though we saved the day in the last game, the residents actually believe that Jak and Daxter were the ones who caused the mess due to the connection with crew. And to be honest, they're not wrong in the slightest. After walking throughout the desert for years and years, we pass out and get saved by a gang of wastelanders. And we awaken in a new city, and we must now prove ourselves to be able to stay within this new and dangerous location. That is essentially the setup, and again, we'll break the story down more throughout this section, but that is how it starts. And with that, we are then thrown into the tutorial arena yet again to relearn all of the basics. So firstly, the movement. Honestly, the movement once again feels identical to what came before, so there's no real reason to talk about it. Let's skip over straight to the gunplay, which is also pretty faithful. However, there has been a development here that really takes the gun mechanics to the next level, as now when you work your way through this title, you'll be able to unlock mods that slightly tweak each weapon to essentially create a brand new invention. For example, the yellow blaster returns in all of its glory, and its first is just the basic state that we all know and love. However, soon we unlock the second, which allows the yellow blaster to ricochet shots, which is just as satisfying as it sounds. The third and final mod turns it into a machine that spits out bullets independently. This offers so much more of a refined gun experience, and it was a hell of a lot of fun figuring out not only which guns were my favourite this time around, but which variations of said gun were my favourite as well. Now, it's not perfect, as it also does work against the game slightly, as some of the gun mods and upgrades are completely redundant and pointless, but personally I'd rather have the choices even if some of them don't fully land. This is something that I felt like could have been added to the previous game, and it is a wonderful addition to Jak III, so thankfully we're already off to a good start with much more in-depth gun options. Okay, so let's just rewind a moment. We still have some new things to discuss, and the next of course is the biggest new feature of Jak III, driving. Well, I say new, but it's basically just been completely redesigned from the ground up. So within this new city, you'll eventually have jobs that you need to go out into the wasteland for, whether it be finding and saving survivors or rescuing certain artifacts. You start with a crappy little doom buggy, but eventually you'll be able to unlock cars that can jump, cars that are disguised as tanks, and everything in between. And I'm so thankful to say that the driving in Jak III, folks, is actually really fun, and the controls are so much better this time around. Every car handles pretty damn well, but just like the guns, you'll always find yourself being drawn to one over the rest. And for me, that is the jumper. Not only is this vehicle quite important for making it through the story, but it's also just so much fun to launch yourself 10 foot into the air. It's simple, but it works. So again, another point of praise for the sequel as well. Now, being totally honest, other than the new focus on cars and drivable creatures, it's essentially more of what we had before. However, once again, Naughty Dog seem to have done their homework, as even though the basic gameplay loop feels similar to what came before, they really make this title feel more like the original Jak and Daxter than Jak II, and this might sound a bit confusing, so let me explain. Firstly is the variety of the missions and the return of minigames properly. In Jak III, there is so much to do. Within the first hour alone, we're driving around in races, herding animals as Daxter, completing short QTEs, treasure hunts, platforming is back properly, a bit more racing on animals, and destroying gigantic metalhead dinosaur creatures. And I want to stress, this is all within the first hour of booting up the game, and it doesn't stop. You will constantly find yourself doing new things, and all of it honestly feels great. I don't have a single complaint about any of the missions here, as they are all pretty much unique, fun, and have a decent challenge to them. When I said that Jak II needed more time in the oven to me, this is exactly what I meant. All of these changes happened in just a year, and the game is already significantly better than the previous, just because things have been fully thought out. Now again, I know that this isn't everybody's cup of tea, but for me it just absolutely works in making sure that I never really expected the next mission and I'd always be up to something unique and fun. But alas, we still have some new mechanics to go through, so let's quickly say what else is new here too. Firstly, I would like to talk about the secrets menu. Now, in the last game game, you could collect Precursor orbs to spend on secrets that unlock you bonus content and behind the scenes stuff, which is fine, but to me seemed a little bit pointless. However, in Jak 3, the secret shop has had an incredible overhaul, and now you can unlock an absolute ton of extras and upgrades, which makes collecting Precursor orbs quite important in this game again, from new cars, funny character tweaks, weapon upgrades, and so much more. You'll genuinely be spoilt for choice, and if you're anything like me, you'll panic on picking which upgrade to choose for that specific moment. Again, a wonderful new tweak. The next we need to talk about is Dark Jak, which returns pretty much identically to how it came before, but with some considerable quality of life changes to actually make it useful now. But an entirely new feature is Light Jak, a collection of new powers to balance out the darkness, and throughout the game you'll be given gifts from the precursors that turns Jak into an actual angel. Oh, look, Mr. Bubbles, I can see light coming from his belly. I can't. That was such a stupid joke. But just like Dark Jak, Angel Jak unlocks a plethora of new moves, from flying around a bit to slowing down time and giving you a shield. And I will say it's pretty cool to use, but you don't really use Angel Jak that much outside of a couple of scripted moments where you're forced into it on a platforming course. It's not a problem, but I just didn't find myself using it that much, or as much as I would have liked to. Now, earlier I quickly mentioned that the missions in Jak 3 have a great amount of variety compared to the previous game, and whilst that is true, they also have fixed the checkpoint issue of the previous game. And I will also say that Jak 3 is a lot easier to complete than 2 as well. Now, this isn't a problem to me at all. I noticed that I was much more casual in my completion of the missions in this game, and I'm not gonna lie, I think upping the difficulty ever so slightly would have been good here, as I am the kind of person who does enjoy a slight challenge, but on the whole, I'm not complaining in the slightest. Honestly, other than that, there really isn't that much to discuss when it comes to the gameplay loop, mechanics, and the missions. The game is honestly fantastic to me, and 90% of the changes in my eyes are for the better. But it could be nostalgia biased, as this is easily the Jak I remember playing most when I was a kid. So with that, let's quickly discuss the characters, the aesthetic, and the music. And folks, you already know that characters is the one thing that Naughty Dog know how to do, and Jak 3 is no different. Daxter is still to me the absolute star of the show, and most of the cast return from the previous game in all of their great glory. However, we do have a few new additions with Damos, Cleaver, and a smattering of others here and there. And again, they are all brilliant, and personally, my favourite new addition is Cleaver. He again just has some brilliant back and forth between Daxter, but not only that, you can put him in a nappy. Cinema! The story this time around is pretty good as well. Now, honestly, I do think I preferred Jak 2's story over this, as it just had a little bit more sauce to it. And honestly, this story was a little bit predictable, with certain people being more than what they seemed. Don't get me wrong, it's not a bad story, and I even controversially really enjoyed a certain Daxter-related twist that many people seem to hate, but I kinda loved it. So again, the story here is fine, and I actually do enjoy the fact that the game connects over several different hubs, which makes it feel much more grand than before. But when it comes down to the details, Jak 2 still has the edge. Of course, with the music and the soundtrack, they once again just knock it out of the park. There is nothing for me to complain about. I really enjoyed the music throughout, and it's just another feather in the cap on a job well done. What would a Jak game be, however, without boss fights? And to me, Jak 3 also has better boss fights than what came before. For example, at one point you fight a precursor robot, and to eventually win you'll need to rely on good timing, good weapon play, and there's also puzzle elements, which I really enjoyed seeing back this time around. Now, don't get me wrong, not every boss fight is perfect. The car section where you have to fight this huge machine thing by shooting out its feet was extremely tedious, but I still did enjoy myself thoroughly throughout. But there is one more thing that I need to say, and that's a certain villain from the previous game returning as pretty much the main antagonist for Jak 3, and I hated this. Errol returns from the previous game, and this was such a swing and a miss for me. I did not care enough about Errol in the previous game to really think him the main focus of Jak 3, and I would have preferred a totally new villain rather than what we got. But we also do technically get a brand new villain as well, but that goes absolutely nowhere. So unfortunately as well, the antagonists this time around are a little bit lacking as well. On the whole though, I wholeheartedly prefer Jak 3 in pretty much every single way to the game that came before. And whilst again, I know that it may be a controversial opinion, it is honestly the truth, and I had so much more fun with Jak 3 than I did with 2. However, in the grand scale of things, I do think that the Precursor legacy still has the edge over 3, which means that 3 is going to be going into the number 2 spot. And yeah, I really do love this game, I can't lie. To me, Jak III is the perfect blend of Jak 1 and 2. It's got the charming platforming variety down of the first game, whilst also having the dark, edgy vibe and grand scale of 2. It has so much more things to do, and whilst not every single aspect is better than what came before, to me, most of it is. With that though, the main Jak and Daxter trilogy has now been completed. But don't think that's where the end of the series is by any means, as Naughty Dog have one more game in them, and just like before, they were going to mess with the formula yet again and give us something that we hadn't seen before. Well, they've done it again. Naughty Dog decided to mess around with the tried and tested formula and once again give us something that we weren't expecting, as now Jak and Daxter is a hardcore deadly racing game. But to be honest, some of us may have seen this coming, considering that this is the same team that created Crash Team Racing, so we know they are a fan of making driving games out of their IPs. And right off the bat, I'm going to be honest, I very rarely play racing games, other than the original Need for Speed Underground, which is still a masterpiece, and Pure, which I think is one of the most underrated Xbox 360 games. I've never really gotten into them, but that's no excuse, so let's see if Jak X is a smash hit or a swing and a miss. So of course we must begin with the story, and surprisingly it is a direct continuation of Jak III. A year later, Haven City has been rebuilt and is thriving. However, at a reading of Crew's will, the entire gang gets poisoned, and the only way to get the antidote is to win the Combat Racing Championship, as that is the one thing that Crew wanted that he was never able to get. Honestly, that's pretty much the entire story summed up. Don't get me wrong, as you go throughout the game there is plenty more to be said and revealed, and off the bat, I'm not complaining at all. I mean, you know how much I love Crew, so to see him back in any form was really fun. Now to move on to the gameplay and the fundamentals of driving, and the first point that needs to be addressed is that this game isn't just a Mario Kart clone. It's full-on heavy metal racing where killing your opponents isn't just an option, it's a necessity to claim first prize. And that means we're already off to a good start in my eyes, as I'm just the sort of fella who loves a bit of violence. In games, that is. So with this being a driving title, let's first discuss the vehicles at play here. And you can tell that Jak III was a real test to see if something like this could work, as the vehicles in that game feel very parallel to the ones that you can choose here. Now throughout your journey through the story, you will have access to unlocking more vehicles depending on the class of the tournament that you're fighting in. But the devs seem to really stress that the player can make the perfect car out of any that they choose. Not only can all of the cars be customized with a surprising level of detail, as you can change the tyres, the front and rear fender, the roof, the bonnet, the side panels, the colours, all of it can be changed and customized, with you unlocking more options the more you play, and there are quite a lot to choose from. Not only that though, the vehicles themselves can also be upgraded with Precursor Orb that you get on completion of the variety of races in the game, meaning that with enough love and funding put into it, virtually any car in the roster has the potential to become something that the other racers fear. Straight away, I was surprised with the amount of customizations that you can actually achieve here, even down to choosing the character that you play from, as quite an impressive roster is included of all the fan favourites and even some surprising guest characters. So it's clear that you'll be spoilt for choices. Do you want your car to be a small and sleek missile that can float past the competition? Do you want to have a literal tank on the field that can withstand a lot of pain and deal just as much damage back to the enemy? Or a perfect combination of the both? Here you can do all of that, which is a great way to find the perfect strategy for the individual player. Me myself, I went for cars that had mostly speed, but I definitely liked a good defense so I wasn't getting killed 20 times a race, even though sometimes that still did happen. So that's the premise, but how does the racing itself feel? And honestly folks, I was enjoying myself the moment I was on the tracks. The controls for pretty much all of the vehicles feel responsive, and other than the occasional hiccup when driving in shallow water, the cars behaved exactly the way that I wanted them to. But how do you actually deal damage on the field? That's where the pickups come into play. Throughout the races you will have the options to pick up yellow eco weapons, which are your primary means of dealing damage. From grenades, missiles, electricity bombs and miniguns, there are a good amount of choice, and all of the weapons here are very satisfying to control and get kills with. The red eco weapons, however, are your defensive steps. Shields, oil on the track or fire barricades are just some of the things to expect, and even though they do work well, I do think think here some of them are considerably stronger than others, so picking the right defensive options could be a little bit more work than the offensive stuff. But that's not all, as if you do enough damage with your gear and survive long enough, that's when Dark Eco comes into play, and eventually all of your weapons and gear will be considerably upgraded with the goo. For example, you normally get 2 regular rockets to fire offensively with a pickup, but with the purple upgrade you then get 4, and not only that, they do a hell of a lot more damage than their unpowered counterparts. Honestly, I have no complaints here. All of the weapons feel great to use, they make complete sense for the races and the world that we're in, and I'd say Naughty Dog have done a great job here, as besides the racing itself, I'd easily say that weapons are the next biggest focus, so it's great that they nailed this as well. Now with that, you may be thinking that generic races are the only thing you'll do within Jak X, and much to my surprise, this could not be further from the truth. Throughout the campaign, you will see an incredible collection of game modes that all tweak the gameplay into something different but familiar. For example, you've got the generic races to the death, but you also have an entire death mode where murdering your friends is the only objective. You've got artifact races, power cell dashes, freeze time trials, and even a game mode called Rush Hour where the entire objective is to slam yourself into cars coming in the opposite direction to gain points. Pretty much every level here is fun and implemented really well. The only thing that I will say gave me some grief is Rush Hour. It took me a little while to learn that you actually need a beefy tank to do this well, or the collision will just throw you all across the map and you will not score any points. And this did slightly bug me, but not even close to a level where it wasn't enjoyable. As the second I chose an appropriate vehicle, all of those issues went away. So with us discussing the cars, the racing itself, and the options you have to choose from, we now need to of course discuss the levels that you'll be racing in. And honestly folks, again here, they knocked it out of the park. Throughout your journey, you'll visit all of the locations that you'd expect. Several Haven City courses, sewers, Iceland, Sparga City, and Precursor temples. The levels are exactly what you'd expect, but they are really well implemented. These courses can easily be completed on your first attempt, as I did most of mine on my first attempt, but the true joy is learning each level fully, so that you can really abuse the track when you're racing on it. By the end of the game, I was boosting as much as possible on every level and drifting around every corner that I could, and honestly, this felt fantastic. Phenomenal racing mechanics tied to incredibly well designed maps that look brilliant. The one and only level collections that I really didn't like were the sewers, as there are just so many disgusting bends and obstacles that crashing into everything is just inevitable. Again, they were still fun to play, but easily the least fun out of the whole collection to me. Whilst we're mentioning aesthetics as well, we need to talk about the soundtrack, as easily Jak X has my favourite OST out of the entire series. The heavy metal and edgy vibe to go along with the death racing was perfect, and the high octane music really complements the feel of the game, and point blank, the music kicks ass. It's honestly fantastic enough that I'd recommend you just go and listen to the OST itself, even if you have no intentions of playing the game. It's extremely enjoyable, so again, credit to Naughty Dog here, because it's clear that they know what the hell they are doing when it comes to the Jak and Daxter IP. Now, even though there isn't too much more to discuss on the story front, I will say that the ending I found really enjoyable. I won't give the game away, but again, there is another fantastic twist that I feel like they handled really nicely, and gave the final mission of the title a great grittiness. Folks, I have very little criticisms for this game. Honestly, I think it's one of the best racing spin-offs I've ever played. Now, yes, as I said at the start, that list is very small. Oh, Diddy Kong Racing as well. I used to play the hell out of Diddy Kong Racing. Fuck Whizpig. But Jak X still deserves a lot of credit for being able to do this, and do this to an incredible level that is both mechanically sound and fun as hell. I often don't feel the need to play racing games, I just never get that itch. But without question, if I do get that itch in the future, I can tell you that Jak X will likely be the game to scratch it. It's just really well done throughout, and it surprised me quite a bit. So if you haven't played this yourself, I would highly recommend it. At the end of the day, it's just a great 10 hours where you get to switch off your brain and blow some shit up. Now again, considering that Jak X was such a change compared to what we got, it actually makes it kind of difficult to know where to rank this properly. However, personally, my gut feeling says that it's just going to be below Jak 3. As if I wanted a genuine Jak and Daxter experience, I would go for the Precursor Legacy or Jak 3 first. However, Jak X is a phenomenal game, which is why it's going to be taking the third spot. But with that, that is the end of the Naughty Dog run of Jak and Daxter. We have 2 more games to go, and both were created by different independent developers, and I've actually never played either of them before. So let's move on and see the next bold attempt in the Jak and Daxter series. Or should I just say Daxter? Since I've never owned a PSP before in my life, that means that this is the first time I've ever had the opportunity to play this title, thanks to the entire collection being available on PS Plus. And when I booted it up, I was really surprised to see that this game takes place in the 2-year gap where Jak was being experimented on by the Baron in Haven City. First of all, that is honestly a really smart way to do this title and to give the already established games a little bit more world building, as I was curious to know what Daxter did for the years that it took him to find Jak, and thankfully we now have that answered. So as you'd expect, the game starts with a small recap on Jak II, but this time of course we see it from Daxter's perspective. Now straight away, I was absolutely not expecting the plot that we got here, but it does surprisingly work. Summed up, whilst Daxter was away, he found himself working for a bug exterminator, and the basic gameplay loop sees Daxter visit a load of different places within Haven City to rid them of infestations, whilst also trying to find a way to reach his beloved bestie. This really threw me at first, because the second we get into the first level, those classic Jak and Daxter vibes came flooding back to me. The first level, as you'd expect, also is the tutorial section of the game, and I'm so glad to say that platforming is truly back, and the focus of the series yet again. Without Jak, however, the movement is a little bit more limited at first, and your first weapon is a touch lacking as well, with the only things you're able to do is double jumping, grappling, crawling, and just smacking. But soon you unlock a big girl's way of taking out the bugs, and the gas gun really adds to the experience, as now you can attack creatures from afar with many different types of mods, so you can outright gas them to make them dizzy, set them on fire, or throw bombs at them to kill them instantly, with certain creatures requiring certain mods as well, making sure that you have to really pay attention to what you're using, and there really is a lot of danger in this gun. Even with these options, the movement and combat is definitely more limited than any of the previous games, but that doesn't matter in the slightest, as it works perfectly for this game, so again, no complaints at all. But this gun also aids Dexter's movement, with him being able to launch himself into the air with it, or maintain ground momentarily. And for most of the game, this is how you'll approach each of the levels as you get rid of bugs, collect Precursor orbs, and Metalhead tokens. And honestly, that's all this game needed. A simple premise and simple controls executed well. For a PSP game, I was quite surprised with how much I was enjoying this straight off the bat. But as you'd expect, there is a lot more here than just that as well. As throughout the game, you will also have hoverbike missions where you must kill more bugs or potentially save plants, which offers a lovely change of pace. When not in a mission as well, you will have a small scooter that you can use to explore Haven City with, and this plays well into other missions like the first time that you spot Jak, and you must chase after him throughout the city. There is certainly more to do here than I was initially expecting, which again was a lovely surprise. Minigames are also back in a small capacity, and whilst you won't be thrown into one every single level, there are certainly a few great little additions just to mix up the gameplay. And speaking of new additions, we have to talk about Daxter's dreams, and the reason for collecting Precursor orbs. Daxter, as you'd expect, is a living creature, and whilst you're on your travels, as I said, you can collect Precursor orbs, and if you collect enough, you are able to unlock some bizarre new levels in Daxter's dreams. Most of these are just short QTE sequences, but they are a lot of fun. From The Matrix, Braveheart, and even Lord of the Rings, you will have short adventures here where you will see Daxter in a new light, and these were honestly hilarious, and again, just another little something to reward the player and give yet another fresh change of pace. So now let's talk about the level design, as that's incredibly important to this game as well. And I'm very pleased to say, folks, that Ready at Dawn knew this, and they did another incredible job in the locations that you'll visit. Now, as I said before, you'll spend most of your time within Haven City, but I honestly would say that there's more complexity here than there was in Jak II, as throughout your adventures you'll be visiting building sites, brewery basements, train systems, and so much more, and all of these locations are fantastic. A personal favourite of mine is the ice level, where you spend most of your time in a gigantic fridge factory that specialises in selling frozen fish. There is just so much to do here, and it all looks fantastic. The levels look and feel something straight out of the first game, which I mean as the highest form of compliment. And honestly, the levels design here outclasses some parts in Jak II to me, so another really well done job. Each location, on top of looking fantastic and unique, will also have you doing something that you won't find in other levels of the game. The train system, for example, will have you jumping rooftops in quite an edgy, high-octane moment as you try and reach specific locations. The aforementioned ice level again has some unique traps and some fantastic platforming, and there is only a single mission in the entire game that I honestly really wasn't a big fan of, and that's the mission where you have to go and find bug nests within like a cave system. And the only reason why I didn't like this is because it was very easy to get lost, and trying to find the last few spots for the nests was quite difficult. But other than that, they were so much fun. But what kind of game would this be without boss fights? And folks, I can't stress how much fun these boss fights are as well. A perfect mixture again of shooting, dodging and puzzle work. The way to smite these creatures down may not be obvious at first, and it may take a couple of deaths for you to figure it out like myself, but it's a hell of a lot of fun figuring it out. And again, I enjoyed every boss fight that I faced in this game. Now, honestly, on top of that, I don't think there's much more to talk about. Daxter is very much a fantastic game that I feel is most similar to the first, and I absolutely loved that. But since this was a title for the PSP, it is a smaller game that was made to be played on the go, but that doesn't make it any less enjoyable in the slightest. On top of that, you have to remember that this was made by a different dev team than Naughty Dog, so for a separate team to get the tone and the familiarity nailed down so well is incredible, and I have to sing the praises of Ready at Dawn. They absolutely knocked it out of the park here, and Daxter still to this day is regarded as a phenomenal spin-off title that most people adore, myself included. And again, considering that this was the first time I'd ever played or even seen anything of this title, I was actually amazed from start to finish on how much substance Daxter actually has. But before we wrap up, we of course need to talk about the characters, and folks, you know what's coming. Again, it's just fantastic. Daxter as the lead makes so much sense, and they have done him so much justice. He's still the quippy, cowardly horn dog that we've come to love, and watching him interact with these new characters such as Osmo and Tarin gives the exact same great feeling as watching him interact with any of the other characters in any of the other titles. If you, like myself up until this moment, have never played Daxter, I would heavily recommend you give it a go. It's just a short but sweet adventure that really helps deliver more information on Haven City and the gap in between the mainline story, but it's filled to the brim with love, heart and passion for the IP, so I literally cannot say anything negative here. It surprised me in many ways, and now I regard this as a fantastic title in the series. So where does Daxter stack up against the rest? Well, no matter how good it is, I do think that the only place that I could realistically place it would be under Jak X, as again, I would play those 3 games over Daxter pretty much any occasion. But just because that Daxter's now in 4th place, don't think that I'm trying to undermine what this game actually is and how fun it really can be. It's just, again, I'd play the other 3 over it any day, but it is still a fantastic title that is well worth you giving a go. So the first spin-off title was a renowned success. People absolutely loved this game and thought it was a phenomenal addition to the series, so that gave the stage for another shot. One final game in the timeline that hopefully would win fans over yet again. And it's quite impressive actually. With all of the changes and switches that this series has had over the years, we now reach easily the most controversial game in the entire series, and again, I've never touched it before. So here we are at the final Jak and Daxter game. The Lost Frontier was made in 2006 by High Impact Games. The geniuses behind... oh no. Secret Agent Clank and size matters. Alright, but regardless of what came before, it's now time to see what this final installment has in store for the players, so let's waste no time and get straight into it. Firstly, the story. The game begins with Jak, Daxter, and apparently Kira, even though that looks nothing like her. They are flying through an eco-storm. They're on a mission to discover the reason behind the lack of eco throughout the world. However, thanks to some space pirates, we crash land on a new planet called the Brink, that apparently the Precursors just decided to stop building halfway through. Eventually, we find a new civilization and we join forces to find the last of the eco and save the universe yet again. And that's pretty much the story going forward. It's not the worst concept in the world, and I for one was happy to see the return of eco. But how does the game actually play? Well, let's jump into Tutorial Island to see what's happening. Now, on the surface, things seem very similar to the previous games. The movement mirrors that of the previous titles with double jumps, spinning and uppercuts, even though the forward roll has been totally removed, which is a shame because I'd love just full sending myself around the map with that. But shooting, as you'd imagine, also returns in exactly how you'd expect. Now, instead of a gun that morphs into a different weapon though, now you have a stick that morphs into different weapons, and we once again see the red scattergun, yellow blaster, and the sort of that. Straight off the bat, folks, I've got a rather large complaint. The movement and the combat does not feel good in the slightest. Now, besides Jak feeling quite stiff, the The reason for this problem to me is that the new enemies that we find throughout the land just do not respond whatsoever to Jak's attacks. Now, I honestly am finding it quite hard to put into words what's wrong about this, but on the surface it does look like the Jak movement we've seen throughout the years. But here, landing hits and fighting enemies just does not feel good in the slightest to me, and thanks to the lack of effect on hitting enemies, they can swarm you and overwhelm you pretty easily, turning combat into almost a chore, which I was very upset to realise. Shooting also behaves this way and feels significantly worse than what came before. Now, the blaster is fine, but the scattergun, for example, no longer creates distance between you and whatever you're shooting at, making it feel really bad compared to what we had before. And it's also worth noting that Dark and Light Jak have been completely removed from the game, which I wasn't expecting, but there is a reason for it that we'll get to in a moment. But thankfully, there are some new features to this game that we can talk about, and off the bat, I do like the direction that they chose. Firstly, and most importantly, this game has an enormous emphasis on flying. It's the next logical step considering what we had before, and honestly, I didn't hate the plane sections where you had to defeat space pirates whilst making sure to stay alive. These sections were definitely more fun than controlling Jak, so I definitely didn't have a bad time flying throughout the sky. Now, as I previously mentioned, without Dark and Light Jak, you may be wondering what replaces this, and thankfully we have another point of praise: the return of regular eco. Throughout your adventures you can find precursor plinths that transferred a coloured eco to Jak that he can then use in combat. For example, red eco creates an energy ball that when shot blows up and causes quite a bit of damage to whatever's close, whilst green eco allows Jak to create crystals to either help defend him in combat or create bridges to reach certain areas. I don't mind these changes at all, and honestly it was really nice to see regular eco back after so long. So yeah, I accept this fully. But there is a catch. Dark Jak may be no more, but instead we now have Jak Daxter. After another dip in the goo, he is now transformed into Ty the Tasmanian Devil, and all of his moves reflect this as you take care of enemies moving forward. Personally, I absolutely hated this. Daxter didn't need an edgy dark version, as the one for Jak made total sense with him being experimented on for years. But you're telling me that now if Daxter got another quick dip in the goo from the first game, this is what we would have got? Yeah, I'm honestly not a fan of this, and I really don't think it helps with the overall lore of the series. Even though to me the sections involving Jak Daxter are quite fun, but overall I'm not a fan of this decision. The final point to Dark Eco is that now it is a currency that you can collect throughout the game, and it can also be spent at Kira's to give the player a collection of upgrades. This change I absolutely love. It's told that Kira is following in Samos' footsteps and wants to become a sage herself, so with Dark Eco she funnels energy into it and creates the upgrades that we need, such as better health, more attacks, and such that you'd expect from this game. And I love this change and thought it made perfect sense as a natural progression of Kira's character, even though throughout the story they absolutely butcher her, like properly drag her character through the mud and mire. And speaking of butchering characters, oh boy did they decide to make some baffling choices when it came to the people that you interact with in this game. Now straight away I want to say that thankfully Daxter is pretty much his regular self. I think the devs knew that they couldn't interfere with his personality too much or people would not be happy. So for the most part he's exactly what you'd expect, although now he's got pants that he's always wanted, which is lovely. The rest of the cast and characters though, I absolutely fucking hate. Jak is no longer his edgy self that likes drama and chaos, but also wants to do the right thing and is essentially the four-time hero of the universe. Here in The Lost Frontier, he's meek, he's whiny, he's honestly clueless, and nothing proves this more to me than the first interaction that he has with Tim.
What are you doing way out here?
Wow, that's two. Don't know that either.
Do you know anything about these dangerous robots out here?
With me.
Oh, please tell me you can fix the plane.
Like, this isn't the Jak that we know, and he has now been turned into such a one-dimensional character, which is a considerable downgrade. Kira as well has also been butchered. Apart from the one direction that they took her that I really like for a character arc in her being a sage, I absolutely cannot stand the rest of her or her design. She pretty much sacks off Jak for the entirety of the game for this handsome, sexy pirate, and there's no reason for it. Absolutely no reason why she'd throw away her best friend and love interest of the past 5 games for a random pirate that she barely knows. And she just doesn't look like Kira in the slightest, and this just really threw me, so again, another complaint. You may think that with the new additions to the roster though that there may be some luck here, and unfortunately no, they all absolutely suck. Every single character in this game is one-dimensional, a complete cliche, and their designs are pretty boring boring in my eyes, which really sours something that made these games special. I mean, when you look back to the original first game, every single character you meet has so much personality and charm, just from their appearance alone. Yet here, absolutely zero characters are memorable. Another thing that really bothered me as well is the voice actors. Now, the voice actors do a fine job, don't get me wrong, but the devs reuse the same voice actors from previous games as completely new roles. This really threw me when talking to Skyheed, as the voice actor for him is the voice of Sig. Why would you have one of the most recognizable voices and characters of the entire franchise voice a brand new character in the exact same way?
Noble pursuit. Perhaps we can be of some assistance. It is called the Eco-Seeker, and it is said to point to any major eco-source.
I hated this. Now, we have just said a lot of negatives about this title, and I feel bad. So let's quickly mention something that I enjoyed. The music. The music in this game is absolutely fine and fits the theme of what we had before. Yep, there we go, that's a positive. Moving on. Folks, you may not think this is fair, but playing this game physically pained me. I absolutely could not stand it. So, I didn't play much, I'll be honest. I think I put a total of maybe 3 hours into this, and I really couldn't take any more. I was so bored out of my mind here, and pretty much everything felt like a considerable downgrade to what came before. Now, I know that this is a PSP game, so they had to make cuts and tweaks, but after seeing how good that it could be with Daxter, I just can't get over how much I hated playing this. Combat doesn't feel good, the movement is really slow and clunky, the characters suck, the locations suck, the story has its moments, but overall it also pretty much sucks. The only positives I have about this game is Kira becoming a training sage, the flying missions and fights aren't too bad, but again, they can be slow as hell, and the music is decent. Yep, that's pretty much it. Even the boss fights aren't anything special, as they are formulaic and can easily be beaten on your first try. So again, make of that whatever you will. Now, I know the public reception to this game has never been favourable, and I promise you lot from the bottom of my rehydration units that I really went in blind, and I really gave this game a chance, as I often find games that are renowned as badly as this normally still have great moments, and they're never as bad as people make out to be. The Lost Frontier is exactly how bad people make it out to be. High Impact just tried to do too much on a console that couldn't do what it needed them to do for the end result to be fun, and the result that we got is a Jak game that truly misses the mark on every front possible. Again, I hope you don't think less of the fact that this is the only game that I didn't finish, but honestly, I physically couldn't put myself through the rest, and that alone should speak volumes on the quality of this title, as I'm an easy man to please. So it should come as a surprise to nobody that The Lost Frontier is going bang in last place, and honestly, I don't think that's fair. I think I need to come up with an entirely new bracket just for this crap. But actually, you know what? No, let's put a space here. The Lost Frontier is that bad, it audibly needs a gap between the rest of the series. So yeah, Lost Frontier at the absolute bottom, where it belongs. Yeah. Now, it sucks to end on such a sour note, but folks, there we go. That is the entire Jak and Daxter series completely played through, and honestly, besides the last entry, it was an absolute blast to relive all of these incredible moments from a series that I think is still quite slept on. Now, this is just a message for Naughty Dog, and I hope you are watching. Give us more Jak and Daxter. There is no way in hell that The Lost Frontier can be the final chapter in this series, and with the given success of other games in this niche, it's absolutely worthy of a comeback. Please make another one. I really don't want The Last Frontier to be the final one. Please. But on a serious note, that is it, folks. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed me breaking open this entire crazy, wild series that jumps from genres to genres. It's just absolutely spectacular. And if you folks want to hear me talk more about games, then you can check out my other every videos that are covering the Mortal Kombat, the Hitman, and the Sniper Elite series. But don't think that's just everything, as I need you to like and subscribe, as the next every video is going to be my biggest video to date. I am currently going through the enormous task of playing every single Resident Evil game that has ever existed. The mainline entries, the spin-offs, and even the mobile games that I can get my hands on, totaling in over 60 titles. That video is going to be something that you do not want to miss, so please subscribe. But folks, I have already rambled for far too long today as it is. Thank you all so much for watching. I cannot wait to see you in the next video, which is going to be something a little bit different that I haven't done on the channel yet. So I hope to see you all for that, but until then folks, have a fantastic rest of your week. Take care of yourselves. Bye bye for now.